The American Civil War, one of the most defining conflicts in the history of the United States, began with a tapestry of deep-seated issues and mounting tensions. To understand how this war started, we need to travel back to the mid-19th century, a time when the young nation was grappling with profound contradictions and divisions. The United States in the 1800s was a land of contrasts. On one side, the northern states were rapidly industrializing, embracing a future of factories, railroads, and bustling cities. On the other, the southern states were largely agrarian, relying heavily on a plantation economy that was sustained by the labor of enslaved African Americans. The most significant cause of the Civil War was the issue of slavery. The southern economy depended on it, and the social fabric of the South was intertwined with the institution of slavery. As America expanded westward, the question arose, would the new states be free or slave states? The Missouri Compromise of 1820 and the Compromise of 1850 attempted to maintain a delicate balance, but they were temporary solutions to a growing problem. Another key issue was the debate over states' rights versus federal authority. Southern states championed the idea that states had the right to govern themselves and make their own laws, including those about slavery. They argued that the federal government had no authority to interfere in these matters. The North and South had developed vastly different economies. The industrial North favored tariffs and policies that protected their industries from foreign competition. The agrarian South, which relied on the export of cotton and other crops, opposed these tariffs. This economic discord further widened the rift between the two regions. Over time, cultural and political tensions between the North and South grew. The abolitionist movement in the North, which sought the end of slavery, was met with fierce opposition in the South. Political compromises, such as the Kansas-Nebraska Act of 1854, which allowed new territories to decide the issue of slavery by popular sovereignty, only led to more conflict and violence, notably Bleeding Kansas. The election of Abraham Lincoln in 1860 was the final straw for many in the South. Lincoln, representing the newly formed Republican Party, was seen as a threat to the institution of slavery despite his assurances that he would not interfere with it where it already existed. His victory without any electoral votes from the southern states underscored the deep sectional divide. In response, South Carolina seceded from the Union on December 20, 1860. Over the next few months, 10 more southern states followed suit, forming the Confederate States of America, with Jefferson Davis as their president. The conflict erupted into war on April 12, 1861, when Confederate forces fired upon Fort Sumter, a federal fort in Charleston, South Carolina. The bombardment lasted for 34 hours before the Union garrison surrendered. This attack galvanized the North, and Lincoln called for 75,000 volunteers to suppress the rebellion, marking the official start of the Civil War. The American Civil War was not born out of a single event but was the result of a complex web of political, economic, and social factors. It was a conflict that pitted brother against brother, neighbor against neighbor, and it would go on to be one of the bloodiest and most transformative wars in American history. The legacy of the war, including the end of slavery and the struggle for civil rights, continues to shape the United States to this day. With the first shots fired at Fort Sumter, the United States was plunged into a conflict that would last 4 grueling years, from 1861 to 1865. The war unfolded through a series of dramatic events, each shaping the destiny of a nation divided. The early months of the war saw both sides rushing to prepare. The first major clash came in July 1861, near Manassas, Virginia, known as the First Battle of Bull Run. The North, confident of a swift victory, was stunned by a fierce Confederate resistance led by generals like Thomas Stonewall Jackson. The Union troops retreated chaotically back to Washington, D.C., shattering any illusions of a short war. In 1862, Union General George McClellan launched the Peninsula Campaign, aiming to capture the Confederate capital of Richmond, Virginia. McClellan's cautious tactics, however, allowed Confederate General Robert E. Lee to mount a robust defense, culminating in the 7 days battles. Lee's aggressive counterattacks forced the Union Army to retreat, marking the campaign as a failed attempt to end the war quickly. September 1862 brought one of the bloodiest single days in American military history at the Battle of Antietam in Maryland. Lee's invasion of the North was halted by McClellan's forces. Though the battle ended in a tactical draw, it provided President Lincoln with the momentum to issue the Emancipation Proclamation, transforming the war's purpose into a fight against slavery. In the summer of 1863, Lee again invaded the North, leading to the pivotal Battle of Gettysburg in Pennsylvania. Over 3 days in July, the two armies clashed in a ferocious battle that saw massive casualties. The Union, under General George Meade, emerged victorious, turning back Lee's forces. The defeat at Gettysburg, coupled with the Union victory at Vicksburg in Mississippi, marked a significant turning point, signaling the beginning of the end for the Confederacy. On July 4, 1863, after a prolonged siege, Union forces under General Ulysses S. Grant captured Vicksburg, effectively splitting the Confederacy in two by gaining control of the Mississippi River. This victory was crucial in weakening the Confederate war effort and boosting Northern morale. In 1864, General William Tecumseh Sherman embarked on his infamous March to the Sea. After capturing Atlanta in September, Sherman led his troops on a devastating campaign of total war through Georgia, aimed at crippling the Southern war effort. His forces cut a swath of destruction, demoralizing the South and hastening the Confederacy's collapse. Meanwhile, Grant, now the commanding general of all Union armies, engaged Lee in a relentless series of battles known as the Overland Campaign. Despite suffering heavy losses, Grant's strategy of attrition gradually wore down Lee's army. The brutal battles of Wilderness, Spotsylvania, and Cold Harbor exemplified the war's grinding and bloody nature. In the final months of the war, Grant besieged Petersburg, Virginia, cutting off supply lines to Richmond. After a prolonged and grueling siege, Lee's army was finally forced to evacuate both Petersburg and Richmond in early April 1865. The war's concluding chapter unfolded on April 9, 1865, at Appomattox Courthouse. Surrounded and outnumbered, Lee surrendered to Grant, effectively bringing the Civil War to an end. The terms of surrender were generous, allowing Confederate soldiers to return home with their personal belongings and horses, signaling a desire for reconciliation. The Civil War had profound and lasting impacts. Over 600,000 soldiers lost their lives, and countless others were wounded. The Southern economy lay in ruins, and the social fabric of the South was forever changed. Yet, from the ashes of conflict, the United States emerged as a nation more committed to the ideals of freedom and equality. The Emancipation Proclamation, followed by the 13th Amendment, abolished slavery, setting the stage for a long and arduous struggle for civil rights. The war also set a precedent for federal authority over states' rights, reshaping the nation's political landscape. In the years that followed, the United States faced the daunting task of reconstruction, striving to rebuild and heal from the wounds of war. The legacy of the Civil War continues to resonate, reminding us of the enduring struggle for unity and justice.